Hello, this is Fiona Cuthbertson coming from the pods to record another episode of Off the Cuff, and today we have a return guest, Baroness Morgan of Coates. You'll remember from last time that Baroness Morgan has been at the heart of politics since 2010. She's had a number of roles: Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Education Secretary, she was a Minister in the Treasury, and for Women and Equalities and Chair of the Treasury Committee. Since then, she's worked on a number of campaigns, but today, after a discussion around what's going on at the moment, we return to the issue of violence against women and girls on trains, especially considering the Railways Bill is continuing to head down the tracks. So welcome, Nikki.
Thank you for having me.
So firstly, do you think the local elections gave the voters an opportunity to deliver a verdict on how the government is doing?
I think the short answer is yes. I think that the government's record has been found wanting, and we're seeing all the consequences of that playing out now. I have to say, it's extraordinary, really, that we're talking just at the end of May, and early May seems like a long time ago.
Absolutely. And do you feel that the calls for Keir Starmer to resign as PM are reasonable?
I think everyone is bemused, particularly Labour MPs, about how they got to this situation less than 2 years after what felt like a landslide election win for them. But I think political cycles are shorter these days, and I think people's frustrations are such that they are furious, really, that a government that was promised so much has struggled to deliver not much and really arrive without a plan. And I think that for many of us who watch politics, who follow it avidly, is extraordinary. When you've been opposition, when you pretty much know that you're going to get elected, and even then you don't appear to arrive with a plan, and that's before you deal with all the everyday demands of government.
So we are in by-election mode, but maybe it's less about giving the people of Makerfield a strong representative in Parliament and more about the fact that a number of MPs feel that Andy Burnham should become the Prime Minister. But is he going to cross the line?
Well, I think it's going to be really close. I think the first polling shows that it's a real battle between, obviously, Labour and Reform. And I think one of the lessons from our local elections is that multi-party politics is here to stay. We've got a fragmented political system. I guess it's going to come down to people decide that they want to send the Labour government a very clear message. Are people prepared to vote ways they don't normally vote in order to try to send that message? And I think it's very difficult. If you want to give the Labour Party a kicking or frustrated, then actually you might vote for Andy Burnham because you know he's going to challenge for Prime Minister. But equally, if you want to do that, you might vote for somebody else. Likewise, if you don't want to see Reform elected, you might vote for a party that you wouldn't normally vote for, i.e. Labour, because you don't want to see Reform elected. So I think anybody who thinks they can call the election result at this stage is counting their chickens way before they've all hatched.
Of course, even then, he has to have 20% of the PLP backing him for the leadership challenge to be successful. So do you think there's enough support for him to topple the PM?
Well, obviously, I've been involved in a fair number of leadership contests in the Conservative Party. Although the rules are different, I guess often the sort of incentives and behaviours are often the same. I suspect that there's enough people who want to get rid of Keir Starmer that Andy Burnham or Wes Streeting or anyone else would find ultimately the 20%, not because they're Andy Burnham or Wes Streeting, but because people want to get rid of Keir Starmer. And I think that speaking to Labour MPs, there does seem to be a real acceptance about the fact they're going to have to change leaders. They can't go to the next general election with Keir Starmer as leader. So my hunch is that if Andy Burnham wins the by-election, then I think that he will challenge, he will find the support. And it seems to me that he's likely to be successful. Of course, on the big unknowns there's nothing to stop Keir Starmer, as I understand it, standing again for the leadership. And that would be extraordinary if, having gone through all of this, a Labour Party ultimately decided to stay exactly where they are.
You've mentioned previously about the fractured nature of politics now and the fact that Reform is very close to winning this election anyway. It's clearly an early predictor of how the national elections will go, but the Conservative Party have their candidate, Michael Winstanley. But do you think that he's going to be able to cut across the noise of the fact that this is a pseudo leadership election?
I think it's obviously going to be very difficult for anybody who's not either Labour, i.e. Andy Burnham, or Reform candidate. But look, I think it's fantastic. Having someone like Michael Winstanley, who has stood in the seat before, who is a local, who knows the area, there were calls for the Conservatives not to stand a candidate in this by-election, and I think that would have been utterly wrong. I think if you want to be a national party, and the Conservative Party absolutely is, then you have to stand in every single by-election. And look, I'm sure many people listening may well, like I have done, been a candidate in an election where, frankly, you knew what the result was before you even sent out your first leaflet or knocked on your first door. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't stand. And my belief is that if you don't give people a reason to vote Conservative, i.e. by not having a Conservative on the ballot paper, it'll be no surprise if people lose that habit. So, his candidacy is really, really important. And of course, all views will be on Makerfield, but there is another by-election happening the same day in Aberdeen South, where the Conservatives actually have got a very good chance of taking that from the SNP, and that would be extraordinary.
Absolutely. Coming back to violence against women and girls, you laid some amendments down in the crime and policing bill on this issue. Can you tell us about the reasoning behind those amendments?
We wanted to test the government's thoughts on how violence against women and girls on trains is best addressed. And often what happens when you're trying to get a change in the law, you have to have several attempts in order to do it. And so with the crime and policing bill, the amendments were very much drafted to put pressure on the British Transport Police to collect data, to work with those involved in the rail industry to tackle violence against women and girls. And that's why the British Transport Police obviously would be hugely invested in all of that. But it was as much in those amendments to get a sort of gauge a reaction from government. And to be fair, the Home Office Minister in the House of Lords, Lord Hanson, he was very warm in the reception to the amendments, understood the thinking behind them. But governments are very good, and I'm pretty sure I've done this in my time, which is, yes, totally agree with the thrust of this amendment, but this isn't quite the right bill. Could you have another go next time? But I was pleased to get it on the record, the issue, and to gauge support, as you've done in the House of Commons as well. And I hope in this session of Parliament we're going to have a chance to go back to the issue.
Absolutely. With the Railways Bill coming through, that means that they're going to be responsible for all issues, including violence against women and girls on trains. So does the government realise the magnitude of this?
So following the debate in the crime and policing bill, I had a very helpful meeting with Lord Hendy of Richmond Hill, who is the House of Lords Department for Transport Minister. I think that the government is intensely sympathetic to the need for women and girls, vulnerable people, to feel safe when they are using all public transport. We're talking about trains in this context. But I think what the government haven't yet realised, and I'm looking forward to the debates on the Railways Bill when it reaches the House of Lords, which I don't think will be very long, because I think the next stages are planned for the 3rd of June. It's going to be the final stages, and then it'll come to the House of Lords. I will be interested to know where the government has realised that actually by taking on national ownership of the railways, the buck stops with the Department of Transport on issues like tackling violence against women and girls and safety more generally. It's not something they can delegate to an arm's length body, because there won't be one there. And GB Railways is going to have huge accountability for what happens on our trains. And therefore, that's what the amendments I'll be putting down, that's what they're designed to demonstrate. So it'll be very interesting to see. The government have understood the problem. They are sympathetic to something to do about it. Will they ultimately accept responsibility? Let's see.
Absolutely. They will no longer be able to mark their own homework by saying, we're speaking to this one and that one and all the rest of it, when you actually know that the reality is, as we say, the buck stop with them now. So that will also mean that they need to engage with the industry to ensure that the right changes are made. So how are you going to propose that they do that?
So I think what's really interesting is a lot of the debates now about safety. I've been very involved, as we've discussed before, about the issues of online safety, particularly for women and girls. And I think there's now a very strong view about what we call safety by design. And that means when you're talking about any kind of product or service, that you're thinking about safety issues right from the start of that design, and how do you keep people safe? And whether you're talking about online spaces or whether you're talking about train carriages, the fact is that actually the government through GB Rail will be able to require train companies, when they are designing new rolling stock, to think about safety, in this case of women and girls, right from the word go. And I'll put that in the requirements, and that is understood. And I think the difference with what the government is currently sort of working on, which has been about safer railways, but that focus has, it's welcome, but it's been about the workforce. How do they tackle, those working on the trains, tackle issues around violence against women and girls? And so what the amendments will be designed to do is to say, actually, you've got to go further, think about safety by design right from the word go and have those requirements as part of the way that GB Railways is going to operate.
So this is going to be about creating a gold standard around safety, making sure that people use the railway network and that they actually have confidence within it, and they're able to essentially get to A to B feeling happy and confident on the railways. Now, the secure station scheme has been rolled into the safer railway scheme. So there was talk previously around essentially extending the secure station scheme and actually including rolling stock. So would this also provide an opportunity for violence against women on trains to be properly addressed?
Well, possibly. The government has just announced this safer railway scheme. It is an accreditation scheme. And interestingly, violence against women and girls is specifically mentioned. I think the safety at stations, I mean, speaking as a very regular train user myself, it's fine if it's the middle of the day, there's lots of people around, everything else. But we all know that actually coming home late at night or sitting on a rather lonely station platform is not a happy experience. And actually asking people running stations to be part of a scheme and setting out what they have to do in order to be accredited as part of that scheme is undoubtedly a step forward. But again, I think with all these things, where does the ultimate responsibility and accountability lie? It's one thing to be accredited, but what happens if you're not accredited? What, for example, is the Department of Transport going to do to require you to be accredited or to engage with the British Transport Police? Some of the better companies will want to engage, they'll want to be accredited, they'll take these issues very seriously. But it's always the ones where actually often danger can be most prevalent, or those operating are a bit cavalier, who actually don't comply or take part in these schemes. And that's where the problems lie. And train travel, I say many of us, most of us, it's not optional. You're getting to and from work. You're getting to and from family commitments, for example. Therefore, you want to be safe at all times. And you have a perfect right to expect that.
And finally, without amendments like these, do you think the government are going to be able to do enough to commit to real change on this issue?
Well, I don't doubt that the Minister in the House of Lords takes this issue very seriously. You know, he has engaged, I've had a couple of good conversations with him and everything else. But I think that probably often he will receive advice, which is, Minister, we haven't put this in our bill initially. We'd like to not accept this amendment. What can we do to head it off? You know, a scheme, a regulator, an accreditation. There'll be all sorts of suggestions that they will have. I guess ultimately, if you want to see real change, then actually having government statutory backing from the Department for Transport saying, yeah, we own this as an issue, and we are going to make sure that actually we are sending out a signal that women and girls deserve to be free from violence, harassment, intimidation, threats when using trains. The best way to do it will be, of course, to accept our amendment. But I suspect we've got a way to go before that happens.
Well, you never know, Nikki. They might just decide to actually do the right thing and help us women to make sure that we are safe on those trains. So
I hope so.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for coming back to see us again. It's wonderful. And obviously this time we're on video. So as opposed to saying to our listeners, I'm saying to the viewers, thank you very much for watching. And thank you to Nikki very much for coming on again, as I say. And I hope everyone's enjoyed watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much, Nikki.
Thank you.